Okay, I think we'll get started here and we'll try to go real quickly since we have a packed agenda. Welcome everybody to our third virtual CAG meeting. And we wanted to put out there tonight, quickly before we jump into things, a little poll, and that is Tom Kraus, the CAG co-chair, had proposed that we switch the time, the standing time for the CAG meeting to business hours or something overlapping business and after hours, anything from say 2 to 4, 3 to 5, or 4 to 6. And all the EPA folks and state folks, I believe, are all okay with that. And we wanted to put that out to everyone. And you can enter a chat opinion about that as you think about it during this meeting, or send Janine and I an email later on. But we think it might be good, since we anticipate these virtual meetings continuing on for at least, well, we don't know. We have no idea. So put that, let us know your thoughts on that. Let's see, and you had a bunch of stuff in your email yesterday. Sorry for the many attachments, but most of them are just the materials for tonight, in case you couldn't see the screen or anything like that. We included the updates that Bonnie had asked for on 3 topics: the gun club estates, well testing through the site assessment program, the status of the Molly samples, and the status of the community involvement plan updates. So we did send written updates on those things in case we don't get to them tonight. Quickly on meeting protocol, and I know pretty much everybody is an expert now, but introduce yourself when you join the call. Always stay muted if you're not speaking. If you want to kind of get in the queue to ask a question or to make a statement or anything, the best way would be to send a chat, and you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there's a chat box that you can make comments or questions in. And Janine's going to watch that so that she can interrupt and let us know someone has a question. I will ask, however, that everyone hold your questions till the end of the presentation, because it's hard for us to get through this agenda if we get off on too many tangents or questions in the middle of it. So please hold your questions to the end of each presentation so we can make some progress and stay hopefully on schedule. We're already late. We're already a little behind schedule. So let's see. I believe that's all I need to cover.
Lisa,
and I'll hand it. Yeah.
Lisa, please ask everyone to mute themselves, or I'll be muting them.
Oh yes, I did ask everyone to mute yourselves, but if you don't, Janine will.
Okay.
Because that causes echoes and background noises. That was me too. I was muted. Sorry.
Nope,
Okay.
I figured as much. I clicked on one thing, it muted everybody, and then I was going to unmute you. So please continue.
Okay, so I think I will hand it over to Linda, unless Janine, is there anything else I need to quickly cover here?
Not at all. I'm looking at all the notes in chat, so I'll kind of gather those together for us.
Okay. And I'll hand it to Linda, who's going to launch into our, I believe, our North End investigation discussion.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being on the call, and we appreciate you taking your time to be here. On the agenda, we normally have the site updates in this time slot. We were hoping to have Sarah Teschner, our EPA technical expert, on the call, and we moved this up earlier so that to accommodate her schedule, but because of several reasons, internet connections and childcare, she's not able to be here with us today. unless she does get the chance to call in. So, because Sarah's not here, I did ask for Steve Fundingsland from CDM, who was a main author on this report. And I noticed Tim Shangra is on the phone. He put a lot of effort into this report. And then Bruce Peterman from PWT has been invited to attend. He's running late, so he'll be available to help answer some questions throughout this process. If you have questions, hold them till the end, write them down. We'll get to them. If the technical experts can't answer them on this call, we'll make sure to write them down, and you can also email them to Lisa, and we'll make sure that we follow up and get you the answers to the questions you have. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So Janine, you have to give me access, and then Steve Fundingsland's going to also be a presenter.
Come on. I don't believe that I need to give you access. That you see the share screen at the bottom of your.
Yeah, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Did I? How did I do that?
I don't.
Hold on.
Okay.
Where? Oh, my window just went timing too. Just a minute. I'm having a challenge. Oh, for goodness sake. Can you do it now?
No.
Allow. Well, that's the new one on me. Now?
No. It says
Oh, wait. Oh, here. Okay, I got it. How's that?
That is perfect. Okay. Here we go. All right. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I need to do one more thing here. Okay. So I wanted to outline the process that we use to get community input on the North End investigation report. So back in 2018, and some of you may have been involved in developing the work plan for this. The work plan that was selected was to install 6 additional monitoring wells. I think 4 of them were near the Gun Club Road in Mississippi intersection, and a couple down by Jewel to pair them with existing wells. So starting in late 2018 into 2019, those were installed. Data was collected and a report was generated, and EPA did several rounds of review on that report. And then in October 2019, the draft was finalized and made available on our public website, EPA's public website, for public comment. Because of the holidays, that what would typically be about a 30-day comment period was extended. And on January 10th, Dietrich McGinnis submitted comments to EPA on behalf of the CAG. Sarah, reviewed those comments and wrote a technical memo, which was one of the attachments to this meeting invite. So EPA responded to those on February 25th. In April, CDPHE also submitted written comments. We had discussions with CDPHE on the different items, and then on April 25th, a consolidated comment memo was sent to the WSDs for them to look at and incorporate into the final document. Currently, they have incorporated them. EPA and CDPHE are doing a final review on them, so the final has not come out. And so that's today we wanted to go over the report and what the contents were, and that's what Steve Fundingsland will talk about next, and then we'll come back to the comments that were provided and more information on that. But I want to thank everyone who provided comments, everyone who read the report, everyone who worked to put in monitoring wells, collect data. This was a huge endeavor, very comprehensive. It's a 170-page report. So I'm gonna unshare my screen and turn it over to Steve Fundingsland, who's gonna give us just a overview of what was in that report.
Can't hear you.
Thanks, Linda. Let's see. I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, does everyone see the beginning of the report?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Okay, my name is Steve Fundingsland. I'm a geohydrologist with CDM, and I will be celebrating my 30th year with CDM this year. I assume that everyone's pretty familiar with the North End investigation from review of the drafts and then some presentations that have occurred. So my presentation is going to be pretty quick and short, but we can double back and answer questions as you have them. For some reason, my page down is not working. Okay. So the presentation will include the study objectives, which were determined by a group of individuals and agencies. And then I'll go through the results of the investigation. And then finally, the summary, the 9 points that we came out of that's going to support the conceptual site model. Okay, study objectives. Basically, we wanted to sample and analyze groundwater from wells within the footprint of the 1,4-dioxane plume. We wanted to install additional deep groundwater monitoring wells in the 1,4-dioxane plume footprint. And then we wanted to address the 5-year review issue number 7, which was updating the conceptual site model. Okay, hydrogeologic setting. I'll talk about the study area. I'll present 2 cross sections. We'll talk a little bit about hydraulic conductivities, lateral potential surfaces, or potentiometric surfaces, and vertical gradients. So to orient ourselves on this study area map, this is the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. This is the slurry wall, the north boundary barrier wall. This is Quincy North Gun Club Road. The yellow shows the study area. This is Yale Avenue, Jewel, Mississippi. This is Highway 30 landfill. Gun Club Estates is up here. Okay. Okay, this is the monitoring well network that we use to develop the report from. As you can see, there's a considerable amount of monitoring wells that provided information for the report. On this figure also, we have the 1,4-dioxane plume. I'm going to zoom in. And I know that some of you have had questions about this. The perimeter of the 1,4-dioxane plume is solid, where we have a well that has a detection above the site performance standard of 0.9, and we have a well on the outside of that that's below the performance standard. So we have a pretty good indication that that boundary exists between these two wells, and then the same on these two. And where we dash it is where we infer, and that doesn't mean that it's a guess. It's where we use professional judgment. We looked at topography, drainages, potentiometric surfaces, and other transects. So, for example, at the 140, 141 transect on Jewel, we don't have any wells on the outside, but based on the transect to the south and the transect to the north, we're very comfortable and confident that that is located approximate, and that's why we inferred that dashed line. Okay, this is the new wells. We installed 6 new wells, weathered and unweathered well pairs up here at Gun Club Estates. And then we also added one to Jewel, and then another one here at Yale. Also on this map are the 2 private wells at Jewel. This one is about 400 feet, and this one is about 600 feet that we used to inform the report. Okay, this is the cross section at Yale Avenue. So if you were to look at the insert, this is the dad's landfill, and section 30. To the north is section 31. So on this cross section, real briefly, this line here is the surface water, or the surface of the ground surface, the topography. Then we have the different units that we logged in all the monitoring wells that were installed. The orange colored represents a coarse-grained sand that's representative of channel deposits. The yellow represents fine-grained sands and some silts that represent overbank. And then the gray represents clay and silts, which represents floodplain deposits. On this cross-section also is the interface, or the surface between the weathered zone here and the unweathered. So that's represented by this red line. Okay. The well IDs are above the well. The non-slotted area pipe represents casing where it's sealed off from the formation. And then the screen, the slotted zone is shown by those dashed lines there. Water levels are depicted by the water level triangle. And if you can see that the water table basically mirrors topography pretty well. For the deeper wells, these represent in the weathered. For the deeper wells here and here, I've depicted where those water levels are shown based on the arrow. And as you can see, there's not a huge vertical gradient there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple slides. I'm going to zoom in just a tad on this. And like I had mentioned before, the concentration on the left is the 1,4-dioxane. The concentration on the right is for VOCs. So in well number 130 WD, it was non-detect for both 1,4-dioxane and VOCs. And then the highest concentration that we did see for the 1,4-dioxane is in 129 WD, and that was at 7.4. So once again, we can delineate and show that boundary somewhere between 129 and 130. This is non-detect, and this is 7.4. So that boundary is somewhere in there. And we've done the same thing on the eastern side. So at 124, we had 0.95, which is slightly above the performance standard. And then we had 0.57J, which is below the standard. So once again, that boundary is determined somewhere between those wells. And then we bounded the bottom of the 1,4-dioxane plume based on the interface between the weathered zone and the unweathered. And we feel confident that because of the low transmissivity within the unweathered zone, that that represents a pretty realistic boundary. Okay, and then this is a cross section at Mississippi Avenue. So Gun Club Estates is up here, Mississippi Avenue is here. So once again, we have topography surface, we have the weathered, unweathered boundary or surface. Same lithologies. In this, in these northern wells, we pick up a little more lignite or coal. And then of course we have water levels. And what you don't see on this is the plume, and that is because all the wells along the Mississippi transect were below the performance standard, the groundwater performance standard. Okay, hydraulic conductivities. It basically means the ease that water can move through pore spaces or fractures. So the larger the number, the faster the water can move through the media. So not surprising that sands have a greater feet per day than the silts or clays. This is what was determined in the north end. And then just for comparison purposes, we compared it to what was understood on the site of the Superfund site. There's pretty good correlation between the two. Once again, you know, it shows that the sands have a higher hydraulic conductivity than the silts or the clays, which is not unexpected. Okay, this is the potentiometric surface for the weathered Dawson and Denver. We have a lot of control on a lot of wells in the unweathered zone. So basically the red arrows represent groundwater flow direction, which is to the northwest. And it generally follows Unnamed Creek, and then as we get further, Murphy Creek. Okay, this is the potentiometric surface for the unweathered unit. We have fewer wells, but we have pretty good confidence that this is representative of the system out there. Once again, its groundwater flow direction is northwest. Okay, this is a vertical potential gradients. This is basically the location, section 31, which is in the Dad's Landfill area, then Yale Avenue, Jewel, Mississippi, and Gun Club. And then these are the well pairs that were used. So MW115WD was compared with MW115UD. Positive number represents an up gradient. So if you, for these two well pairs in section 31, groundwater from the deeper zones are actually moving up. But you can see that those are very small numbers. And then the separation thickness, has to do with the low permeable sediments. So what 23 feet for this MW115 represents is in the WD, in the weathered well, the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen in the UD was 23 feet, and the majority of the unit was a claystone. So that represents a low permeable sediment that delineates the weathered from the unweathered at these pairs. Okay, these in 2016 surface water samples were collected, and basically the only issue of question was at surface water MC04, which in 2016 had a concentration of 3.1. You can see that it's decreasing. All these have decreased over time. This well is, or I'm sorry, this surface water sample was collected from an unlined pond at Murphy Creek Golf Course. And we believe that it's really more representative of groundwater, that the pond was probably excavated and intersected the groundwater table, but so it shows up as a surface water feature. But the nearby well, 142, had a concentration of 3.3, so it fit with the conceptual site model. Okay, these are COCs in groundwater, and you can see the number of wells that have been monitored and analyzed for concentrations. In the legend here below, yellow at the well represents above the performance standard. Green is estimated value, that's between the performance value and the MDL. And then blue is non-detect. So if we zoom in on the area to the north, we can be relatively assured that we have delineated where the 1,4-dioxane plume terminates below the groundwater performance standard. So at 142, we had 2.6 micrograms per liter. And then at 44 and 45, we had non-detect, and the MDL was 0.15. And then it's further confirmed by the transect at Mississippi Avenue. And as you can see, those were all basically non-detects. Okay, groundwater quality type. Basically, it's an anion, cation, water chemistry representation of what kind of water you have. And we generally use it just as a supportive line of evidence, and the water quality types for the weathered all basically correspond to a calcium sulfate water. The unweathered wells, sodium chloride, and the deeper private wells, sodium biocarbonate. So that's just information that goes further to another line of evidence of our understanding of the system. Okay, the summary points. I won't go through these and read them directly, just right off the screen, but basically we know that the sands represent the preferential groundwater pathway. The pathway generally follows Murphy Creek. There was no detection of 1,4-dioxane in any of the deeper wells or the private wells. And then there's no completed exposure pathway between shallow groundwater containing 1,4-dioxane and the human receptor. And then I'll let Linda address number 10. And I think Linda will then go through how your comments were addressed.
This is Tom Kraus. I'm sorry, I can't seem to get the chat to work. Could I ask a question?
Please.
You state that the low permeability sediments in the weather unweathered Dawson is, anyway, you say that there's no 1,4-dioxane found in any of the deep wells. And so I looked up the 7 deep wells that you have, and looked up in the 2019 O&M report, operation and maintenance. And MW118, one well was never tested in 2019. 5 of the wells were tested, but none of the tests contain any tests for 1,4-dioxane. And so the one well that did test for 1,4-dioxane, which was MW176 Upper Denver, had 3 tests in it. 2 of them included 1,4-dioxane, and the third did not. So if you're not, maybe I don't understand, but if you're not testing the wells, how can you say that there's no 1,4-dioxane in the deep groundwater?
Well, Tom, I guess first off is the study boundary was that first figure that I had shown, and that basically starts at the Yell Avenue intersection. And if you look at the data that's presented in this report, the conclusion is correct.
Well, the data that I did try to look up if any of the wells were tested, and on your report, there's only 2 of the deep wells that I found that gave a date they did, and one was in 2018, and one was in 2020. But the other wells aren't being tested on any kind of regular basis if they haven't been tested in the last year and a half. So that means to me that your data is kind of sketchy and insufficient to say that it's not there.
Well, yeah, I guess I feel pretty comfortable with saying that because of all the other lines of evidence and the depositional system of a fluvial system, a meandering stream, and the low permeability sediments that are between the weathered and the unweathered, I don't believe that there is 1,4-dioxane at those lower depths, and the information that we obtained during this report confirmed that.
Well, then I guess I need to ask is why you're not testing the wells for 1,4-dioxane.
Yeah, that would be above my pay grade, if you will. You know, they're set on routine sampling periods and things like that. And I think I would need to rely on Tim Shangri and the monitoring plans that are set in place to answer that completely for you, Tom. I just don't have an answer for you although one does exist.
Oh, and Tom, this is Linda. Since Sarah's not here and she's not able to answer that question right now, she did offer to have some sessions during the day for people that really want to dive into the data and the technical information. So that would be a great question for that. So if you could send that over to Lisa McLean Vanderpool, we'll make sure to capture that and get you more information on it.
I will, and thank you. That's why I hope that we could try to figure out a schedule where Sarah could show up at the meeting.
Yeah, and so she's happy to have these day sessions. She has a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and her husband works. So the day is much better for her. So we can certainly set those small groups up where we can ask and really dive into the data.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. And folks, I know there may be some other questions. And while Steve, I believe, is done, I think I'd like you to hold until we're at the end of the North End investigation information that's being presented, and then we can get to more questions. Appreciate your patience.
Okay. So this is Linda again, and I'll just go through this rather quickly so we can get to your questions. I don't want to hold that up because I'm very mindful of your time. But I did go through the comments, and this is just a general summary of what some of the comments were about. It's not all inclusive, but it was my way to just kind of summarize what they were. So one was 1,4-dioxane in surface water, in groundwater, and sediments. There were questions about all 3 areas. Downward gradient, horizontal versus vertical flow. There were questions about and comments about the geologic variation, the weathered, unweathered. How do we know that the plume follows Murphy Creek and the geology there? What effect does it have on Highway 30 landfill? Is it near Highway 30 landfill in Gun Club Estates? And there were questions about nitrates in the water and so how were the comments incorporated? It's one of the handouts is the tech memo from February 25th, where Sarah and her team went through the comments, and if it was something that she could provide explanation to, she did in the comments or the responses. If it was something that she sent on to the WSDs, that was noted. The comments were discussed with CDPHE along with their comments through the month of April. Then we had a meeting with Dietrich and Bonnie and Tom, which had a technical glitch on it with Skype. So we scheduled a couple more meetings after that, but we did have the opportunity to talk with Dietrich. And of the 29 CAG comments submitted by Dietrich, 8 were sent on to the WSDs, and that's just a general look at it. Parts of comments also were included that weren't in the 8 that I said on there. And the consolidated comments with CDPHEs and the CAG and TAGS comments went on to the WSDs on April 21st. And they're in the process, they incorporated them, CDPHE and EPA is doing their final review. So what I'm going to show you is, it's very close to being final, but not final yet. The final report has not come out. So the only, in general, the only chemical of concern that was detected above performance levels north of the site was 1,4-dioxane. So they did look for volatile organics and other compounds, but all they found was the 1,4-dioxane. The other conclusion was that the vertical and horizontal extents of 1,4-dioxane have been delineated sufficiently. So the first finding, there was no suggested change to that finding based on the comments from the community and from CDPHE. The second finding, no change. The third finding, so in here, the text that is underlined and in italics was a change as a result of comment. So presented in this report, the physical evidence presented in this report indicates. And then the second part was added based on comments. The lateral plume definition as shown in the figure is based on linear interpolation between known data points where boundary lines are solid, which indicates a high degree of certainty, and indirect lines of evidence where the boundary lines are dashed, lesser degree to a lesser degree of certainty. Such an approach to plume definition is reasonable and consistent with industry standards. So that was a change that was made. Number 4 had no change, 5 no change, 6 we did change the term aquitard to low permeable sediments in this finding. Nitrates was no change. Number 8, no change. And for number 9, this first sentence stayed the same, but another comment was added. And basically it says there's no unacceptable health risk to humans as a finding of the report. So the next steps that we have in discussing the technical issues with Dietrich are, there's 2 future calls planned, one in June, and that's to discuss surface water questions, and then the second one probably will be in July, and that's for groundwater assessment and monitoring. So of the comments that were submitted, many of them, the recommendation from EPA is to assess and continue monitoring. So there will be a monitoring plan in place. The ultimate goal for the site is to update the groundwater monitoring plan. So that will be reflected in that. So I'm gonna stop sharing. So I'll open it up to questions at this point.
And I believe we had asked Dietrich to hold on to questions. So Dietrich, if you'd like to give your question to, I believe it was for Steve's presentation. We can't hear you, Dietrich.
There we go. I'll welcome input from Linda or whoever wants to answer it. First question is, how many times have the wells, the north end wells in Mississippi, the newer ones up there, been sampled?
I believe that there's scheduled, Tim, are you available?
Tim's on mute.
Star 6, Tim.
Maybe I can rephrase that to make it easier. How many times have they been sampled?
Dietrich, we don't know the answer to your question right off the top of our head. We can get it, but it's several.
Okay, because I'm looking at the north end investigation data. And I know they're relatively new, but it looks like the group 176, 178, 177, that north end, I'm only seeing one set of data. Is that correct? One sampling event?
I have no idea what you've seen.
That's from the O&M report that was put out for the last half of last year. That's the most recent one.
Yeah, that would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I do realize that you guys have a certain level that we're reporting on the north end, and your line is drawn not at the extent of the 1,4-dioxane that's found, but at that level. But you did find 1,4-dioxane on at least one of the wells on East Mississippi at a lower concentration, correct?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so the extent of the 1,4-dioxane, it's well beyond that north end. The north end, again, just is where you're at that particular limit. And of course, that's from a single sampling event in the new wells there.
What's shown in the report, that's right.
Okay. I also noted that you had a hit for TCE, maybe mislabeled PCE in the database, as well as acetone.
Yeah, Dietrich, if you identify that and send it off to me, I'll confirm.
Sure. I guess it's it just the new wells first sampling out, we're detecting. It seems a little premature to call the limit of the plume being, what is that, about a half a mile south? It seems like a few more samples might be in line, or at least an expression of that uncertainty.
Yeah, I just want to put in that the northbound or the temporary piezometers up there, they have had multiple sampling periods to them.
Okay.
The new well.
PCE was detected on Mississippi Avenue at the far western well.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, how many wells are you basing your plume mapping on between MW35 at Yale and Mississippi? I think that's a distance of, please correct me if I'm wrong, over 1.5 miles. How many specific wells are you delineating that stretch of the plume with?
Oh, a dozen probably.
Okay, because I'm looking for
The wells are all shown on the maps.
okay, so more than what is shown on the maps, right?
That's not what I said. I said the wells are shown on the maps.
Okay, because I mean, I've got a variety of maps and it varies between 2 and half a dozen. So, and I'm looking at 141, the Upper Dawson and Weather Dawson pair near Private Well 1 is pretty much being it between that and the end of the plume before you get to the wells of Mississippi. It just seems like a very long stretch, and there's actually, obviously this is a hand-drawn plume, I'm assuming?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, because we're seeing details, squiggly lines on the dotted lines that usually would be areas where we had data, but we don't. So it's a little confusing. It does, it brings up a question of the uncertainty of the boundary, even a dotted boundary in that area.
You know, but along that whole where we inferred dashed lines, you know, we're using multiple lines of evidence to locate the probable location of that boundary. So, you know, we use transects, you know, to the south and to the north, and that gives us a pretty good idea of what the plume's behavior is in a drainage.
To say they can actually determine where the boundary like that may be would be unusual to use that type of water typing. It would direct more toward mixing. And I more often see it used to look at sources than I actually do at boundaries. So I agree with you. And of course, these things are always multiple lines of evidence, but the points to collect those evidence, that evidence that you're speaking of, is the problem, I think, in that area. We know that this is preferential flow. And preferential flow would kind of make us think that there's like a stream channels, more than one stream channel there. It seems like we're concentrating on one rather artificially. And maybe this is we do have a plan call about well density and a possible need for additional wells, because I know that was a state comment. And maybe this could be deferred to that discussion. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, considering the number of people that have made time for the call today. But if there's a quick way to address that, certainly welcome to that. But I can move to my next question if you guys would prefer.
And I did want to say that Bruce Peterman was planning on being in the call, but his daughter has car trouble, so he's not available. So Diane, I don't know if you can fill in the meantime for him, Diane McMillan, to just want anyone to know he's not available. But okay, Dietrich, your next question.
Actually, Lowry Peterson-Wright is on this call, and she offered to forward any questions for Bruce to him.
Okay, perfect.
Finally, I'm a little bit concerned about some of the statements on surface water. I'm looking at the surface water data. It looks like there was a program in 2006 and 2016, collecting a couple of 3 sampling points at each point. The statement was made is that the concentration of 1,4-dioxane in surface water is decreasing. It doesn't really look like that determination can be made when you have 3 or less sampling points at each location, 2 of which look like they were taken in a single season and may reflect seasonal variation. So all of a sudden that data set gets real small. And maybe I should follow that up with, we typically would say that's a completed pathway since we have 1,4-dioxane in the surface water and that much uncertainty with the concentration. I know that we reviewed that a while back, and I think that looking at upper confidence level limits, that levels that we would usually calculate for those risk calculations, that would not be possible with these data sets.
So David Berry, can you talk about what an completed exposure pathway is? Are you available? If not, Steve Wharton.
Yeah, I mean, the surface water data out there, I believe there's like 7 samples, all of them being taken in 2016, but there were some earlier samples. And with a data set of 7, it is possible to calculate a UCL. It doesn't have a lot of power, but it is possible to calculate a UCL. And
I probably confess, I operate a lot of surface water monitoring programs. And I hate to put somebody who does the calculations for the risk assessment side on the spot. We would expect a great amount of variability in water chemistry with any surface water, particularly in the Western United States. I'm not questioning the calculation that was done. I'm questioning the data that was handed to you to do the calculations with.
well, you know, there's a couple of approaches to this. One is to develop a UCL given the uncertainty that the sample number is 7. And the other is just to use the Cmax. And even if you use the Cmax, it still doesn't present a significant risk to a potential receptor.
Unfortunately, that assumes that that's the maximum concentration that exists out there. With a data set that small, I'm not sure that assumption has very low power. It would seem that once that it was detected in surface water, it would be more appropriate to do an appropriate program to determine that is adjusted for both season, the occurrence of water, and to determine that? Because I mean, what you're saying is the 7 samples, you calculated the maximum concentration, and within that 7 samples, then you're assuming that that is the maximum concentration that occurs, which still comes back to the original error, which is a small data set.
Right. It's not drinking water. It's water that's used to irrigate the golf course. So that, I don't consider it a completed exposure pathway.
Again, I'm saying because it occurred in surface water, that would trigger the next step, which would be a sufficient monitoring program to determine if there is risk that needs to be addressed. And this only 7 data points going into the risk assessment doesn't sound like that's an adequate amount of data to make that decision. It's not an adequate, I wouldn't be confident saying that's the maximum occurrence off of 7 data points on a system long and large, going through basically a residential area.
Go ahead.
So, no, I just had a question for Dietrich. If he's saying 7 is too few, what is the minimum in your estimation that is adequate, and what would you base that determination on?
Steve, I think we both know there's a number of methods to determine that. And that's going to be based on how we have flows in those surface water features. Again, that's an easy measurement. Those gauges are cheap, but still the argument I'm making is not whether or not it creates a significant risk. The argument I'm making is that because it has been detected there, that it justifies additional sampling so that these determinations can be made.
Right, and all I'm asking you to do is to put a bound on that, because it's one thing to say your data are insufficient. It's something else to say, this is what I believe may be adequate to answer that question. And that's the question.
I think, Steve, I would be happy to help you put that study together or to comment on it if you want to propose it. But I think putting it.
No, I'm not proposing it. You're the one raising objection to the data set. So I'm suggesting if you're going to critique the data set as inadequate, you should be prepared to provide a response as to what you believe, in your professional opinion, is an adequate data set.
A data set larger than 7. But I think we both know there's methodology to address the question you're asking that well exceeds the conversation here. And I would.
No, it's a simple question, and it's fine to say there are multiple methodologies to address the question. I'm simply asking you to say one or more of those methodologies so that we can have something to react to. When you say 7's not enough, that doesn't put any bounds on what you think might be enough.
Steve, I think the error is to say that it's a simple question. It's not a simple question. It has been detected in surface water. It's in an area where an exposure pathway can be complete, so it'll be important to assess what the actual maximum concentration or upper bound would be in order to do the appropriate risk calculation. I don't want to waste all these folks' time, but I think to make the statement that that is a simple question on how many samples are required, I'll have to make.
No, it's a simple question for me to ask you to specify what you think is the appropriate methodology to come up with an answer to that question. So if you can't answer the question, then I suggest that you put something in writing and send it to us, and then we can react to that.
Well, we're very fortunate that I believe we have a call scheduled to discuss that very matter. So I think maybe we should delay this discussion until then. And I'm very appreciative that Linda has been supportive of us scheduling those calls.
Sounds fine.
I think I can defer the rest of my questions. I don't want to be hog the time, but thank you.
We have a question from another person participating in the meeting, and it is that assuming that that data and the discrepancy discussed, will that be shared with the entire group? And this is referring back to Steve Fundingland's presentation.
I'm sorry, what discrepancy?
It's not really clear.
Nicole, do you want to let us know what you're thinking there?
Yes, hi. My name's Nicole Johnston, and I'm the Aurora City Council member and Mayor Pro Tem, and represent Murphy Creek and the areas around it. And there's just been, the previous question, Tom, Dr. Sorry, I'm not saying his last name, but Tom had brought up a question on some of the data, and then Dietrich has as well in this information. And I know that there is going to be some follow-up, and Linda had mentioned, you know, some phone calls during the day to accommodate, but I just want to make sure, since they are brought up and we're all kind of listening and following, but not being able to get those exact answers at this time, that will be shared with the entire group. So anytime there was an issue or a question that someone said, well, we'll look into that, or we'll meet on that, that's the information that I'd like to have shared with the entire group.
Right. So absolutely. So we'll write summaries. So if people do have written questions, make sure you submit them to Lisa so we can make sure that we capture them and cover them. So absolutely. And if you have questions, please let us know.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We also have a point, and I believe that this refers back to exposure pathways. And another CAG member had questioned in the last meeting about cattle that would be drinking the surface water. That's an exposure pathway, yes?
So, David, Barry, can you answer that?
Could you repeat the question, please? I didn't hear the question clearly.
Questioning the point that cattle would be drinking the surface water. Is that not an exposure pathway?
As near as I can tell, the cattle are fenced out of that area. But if you look at some benchmark data for receptors like cattle, a concentration of 22 milligrams per liter is the benchmark for ecological receptors, which might include cattle. So the concentrations that we're seeing out there in the surface water are far below those benchmarks. Milligrams versus micrograms, 3 orders of magnitude.
And then, David, do you want to talk about there was a risk assessment that summary that was attached to our response to comments. You had one for groundwater and one for surface water. And it seemed like it was well within the NCP risk range. Do you want to explain what the NCP risk range is and how that fits in with 1,4-dioxane?
The NCP has developed what they call an acceptable risk range for hazardous waste sites, and that range is from 1 in a million to 1 in 10,000, 1 times 10 to the minus 6 to 1 times 10 to the minus 4th. And the risks that we're looking at out here in the North Boundary Plume area are risks that are within the 10 to the minus 6 to the 10 to the minus 5 range. So those are within acceptable levels as defined by the National Contingency Plan.
Janine, were there any other questions?
Nope, that's all I had from chat. Thanks.
Does anyone have any other any questions that they didn't put in chat?
I don't, this is John Barber. I don't know how far along if we have more to talk about, but I have a statement and then a question. I worked hard to try to understand the pre-read that was sent out to us. There's a lot of presentations, a lot of technical data, and I'm probably the least qualified out of everybody here to understand and speak to that. But I did read everything and look it over. And here's what my takeaway was from that. There is a slight plume. A little bit of 1,4-dioxane has escaped, but it's not a problem. It's not a health problem. It's not an issue. It kind of floats around out there, but it's not serious. There's nothing else in there. There's a little bubble of Molly, but everything is wonderful. Everything's safe. Everything's good. It's all declared safe the way it sounds. Beautiful. That's the way the presentation sounds. My question is, I heard from Dietrich, where is the state of Colorado? Are they in agreement with that? Where is the Tri-County Health Department? Where is the EPA? Are they all in agreement that, yeah, everything is, as I stated, no problem? Maybe a few things that we can look into, but everything is safe and it should be declared safe, and let's move on.
So, I mean, I could speak for EPA. So we agree with the findings of the report. We don't think that there's an immediate risk to the residents in the area. We will continue to monitor and assess situations. So this is we will monitor until the plume is well below risk range in that whole area. The site will be there forever, so EPA is not going away. So I'll turn it over to Colleen or Dustin for the states.
So what I hear you saying is EPA declares it today to be safe. Not tomorrow, but right now, everything looks good. We'll continue to monitor it, but there are no problems.
Right, there's not a significant risk to the residents in the area of the plume. And
so is the state of Colorado in that same place? Do they see the data and look at it that way? And I'd like to hear from the city of Aurora too. I don't know if they want to speak to that now or not, but that's the question. Is everybody in alignment with that?
John, the state of Colorado, we are still reviewing the revisions to this document. So I wouldn't say that we concur with the findings that you've been seeing. As Linda pointed out, additional monitoring is going to shed a lot more light on things. But as for advancing of 6 wells and collection of samples, at this point, I'm still looking at the site.
how long have you been on the site, Dustin?
Has it already been 6 months?
On a 30-plus-year-old site, a lot to learn. Yeah.
Hey, I've been on it for 3 years and I'm still confused.
I know there's a lot of information. Yeah.
And I want to jump in and reiterate what Dustin said. We're still evaluating. We also have our risk assessor looking at the surface water risk data. And so we haven't gotten a read back from him, but he's going to be working with Dr. Barry and Steve Wharton on that. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to pull him in on the call in June, or at least his information when we get to that point. So we're still evaluating it from the state standpoint. As is indicated in the little statement on the Gun Club estates, we're still looking at the issues of private well sampling associated with that area, under our site assessment program. So that's still an area that we want to evaluate there as well.
And then Tri-County Health. I don't know if you want to say anything, Lynn or Keith.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can now.
Thank you. You know, I mean, we have been sampling the wells offsite since 2006, so we feel very confident with the information and the additional wells that have been put in. I think what we would say is the sampling is still ongoing. Things don't just stop today. So as more information is available, if any conditions change over time, the working settling defendants would be held to address that. So we feel very confident. And we have had numerous meetings also with the EPA, the state, and Dave Barry over looking at the toxicology information specifically for 1,4-dioxane. And it's just also not viewed, I don't think, as the same as it was when it was first reviewed and the IRIS information came out on it. So I think taking all that into view, we have a lot of confidence, at least in the information that we've produced. Thank you.
Hi, this is Karen from City of Aurora. I'll turn on my video, even though it's been a long day. My job for the City of Aurora is to make sure that for our citizens and the ones who live in Arapahoe County, that we have the best data possible for the Highway 30 landfill to prepare an accurate and defensible conceptual site model. And I am relying on my colleagues at the state to review these reports. And I think I will be listening very carefully. So I'm speaking on behalf of the staff, what my role is. And I would then divert to Mayor Pro Tem Johnston to talk about her perspective.
Nicole?
Perhaps we lost Nicole.
Yeah, it looks like she's not in the,
I think she dropped off.
yeah, I believe she did.
Okay.
She probably dropped off to attend that
COVID town hall.
COVID town hall, I suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's not on the call now. We do have another question though, and Margie Sobey would like to ask for it. Ask herself.
Thank
Margie?
you. This is Margie. The question I have is, we know that CDPHE and the EPA have had an ongoing disagreement about the basic foundational methods for some of the studies that have been going on. And this has been going on for months, I mean, almost close to a year. And so if there's a question regarding the whole foundation of how you even research anything, I'm confused as to how any conclusions are being made until the two agencies settle their dispute. I don't know why there's even anything, why anything is even ongoing still. Doesn't that need to be resolved first?
Margie, we're making every effort to work with the state and get on the same page or clarify our differences. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last 6 months or so. That's just my personal opinion. But it's been actually very easy to work with them, have technical discussions and academic, just, you know, it's been very good. So I think we're working to improve that. That's a conscious effort on both parts of both agencies. I don't know, Steve, looks like you want to say something too.
Well, no, I'll just add to what you were saying, Linda, and just you know, reiterate that same sentiment that yes, it's absolutely true that over the not just the last year, but longer than that, there's been an ongoing technical disagreement, dialogue. There are a number of ways you could characterize it. But, I will say, just to reinforce what Linda was saying, over the last 6 months even, I think we have made great progress. Yes, it's true. There was a formal disagreement lodged on the part of the state with the EPA under the state memorandum of agreement. I'll invite Colleen to weigh in on this as well. But today, I would say we are very close to having that resolved. The dispute and, more importantly, the underlying technical issues, allowing for what we were just talking about, Dustin and Linda were just, you know, talking about. We have Colleen, we have Dustin now, and there is a lot of information to absorb. So understandably, it's taken a little while to work through all of that, but we've made a lot of progress, and I think we're very close. So I do think it's a bit of a misstatement or overstatement, perhaps, to say that we disagree on the primary or foundational approaches for looking at site data and interpreting what they might mean. So again, I'll invite Dustin or Colleen to weigh in.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So from the state's perspective, we basically are taking the issues that we've had with EPA sort of one at a time and trying to work through and resolve them. So we have made quite a bit of progress. There are still some issues that we're evaluating and working on, but you know, in this North End report specifically, we had some really good conversations. There were changes made to the report based on our comments, and we're on the same page with EPA that additional assessment needs to be done to delineate the extent of the plume, and that was one of the comments that went to the WSD. So, you know, we are, I think, moving forward in our relationship with EPA, and while there are still some outstanding issues we need to work through, I think we've made a lot of progress over the last 6 months. We have a ways to go, certainly, but I think we're moving in the right direction. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to either resolve issues or become really clear about where we may differ and be able to still proceed even if we disagree on points.
Well, I'm glad to hear that everybody's working together nicely. That is encouraging. But from my uneducated perspective, I'm still having trouble with if the foundational principles are not agreeable between the two parties. Isn't it jumping the gun a little bit to start declaring things protective?
So let me try to address that a little bit just from the state standpoint. I think where we are at is
I'm in a Skype meeting.
Oh, somebody's talking underneath me.
Janine, can you mute everyone?
Yep, coming up. Hold on, everybody pause. Colleen, unmute yourself once I do this.
Okay, so let me try this again. So from the state's perspective, we're sort of taking the sort of foundational technical disagreements one at a time. And there are a lot of things we agree with, you know, the historical information and the remedial investigation, you know, general groundwater principles that, you know, sort of are industry wide, that kind of thing. And there are things we disagree with, and that's where we've been having the discussions. So, you know, the data, you know, and how you use and interpret the data, sometimes maybe we have a disagreement on, but the data is the data. So it's not like everything that's been done can be just disregarded. There's a lot of good work out there, and we just are making sure that we're on the same page as far as how we move forward based on that data. And we may not always agree exactly what it means, but if we can agree to sort of a path forward and then reevaluate as we move forward to see if maybe we need to collect more information or not to make decisions, I think that that's where we want to go. But to say that we are in so much of a disagreement where we can't make any progress, I don't think that that's the case. I think we have quite a bit of agreement at this point where we continue to make progress in certain areas, and then there's some things we still need to talk through to figure out how to evaluate and resolve some additional information that we need as far as conceptual site model, data, how do we interpret capture, that kind of thing. So we do have a lot of information that we agree on as the two agencies at this point. So I think there are some areas that we certainly should be moving forward, because if we just put everything on hold, waiting to resolve a handful of issues, we'd be making no progress at all on the site.
Well, thank you. That was very helpful to me. And I'm going to repeat something that I've said for probably the last 4 meetings, and I will continue to say, and that is, this kind of a discussion makes me feel much better about disagreements than when I hear that you all are going away to get on the same page and then come back and present a united front. I will always be suspicious when that happens. When I hear these kinds of discussions, though, I get a better sense of what's actually going on, and I can feel better about things. So that's my standard comment that I will repeat at every meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie. Now we have Sonia Skakic she's got a couple of questions she really needs to ask. Go ahead, Sonia.
Hi. Yes, I had 2 questions. One is, under what circumstances would EPA, what circumstances would need to obtain in order for EPA to require additional monitoring wells and therefore additional sampling, so that base plume perimeter assumptions could be based on more direct and robust data? And then part 2, are there any circumstances that would obtain that would allow other entities, such as CDPHE and the CAG, or the CAG, to insist on such additional data collection? Is that clear, or should I rephrase? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just we're all muted. So I was going to ask Steve Wharton if you can answer that, if he's still here. He's probably muted too. There he is.
Yep. Yep. Sorry about that. Yes. Well, there are a couple of parts to your question there. And, you know, I'll try to address at least one part, maybe not fully the second part, because there are considerations that are not just regulatory, if you will. They're much more technical in terms of looking at the data sets. You know, part of our discussion this evening has been around this concept of protection or protectiveness of the remedy. And there are 2 very different ways to approach that question. One is starting from the presumption that unless you can demonstrate there is a complete exposure pathway, then the demonstration of risk is incomplete, if you will. The other way to approach it is pretty much the opposite, where you start with the presumption that there is some possibility, no matter how small, that an exposure pathway and therefore a risk might exist, which would then lead you to start with a basic conclusion that things may not be protected. So the regulatory agencies tend to take the first approach. We tend to start with known areas of contamination and start building information about that. We essentially come to know about, become aware of, or discover areas of concern, areas of known contamination, and we then start characterizing those, and we start stepping out from the area that we know is contaminated, may have source material still there, still potentially causing a release, and working its way out into the environment. And that's typically the way we approach it. So again, the reason I take the time to describe these two approaches is because it's very hard to reach the middle, if you will. It's difficult to reach that point where the two approaches overlap, and essentially where you can then have agreement, no matter which position you start from, that you have enough information to say, this is adequate. We all agree at this point that we can rely upon this analysis, these findings, based on whatever the data are at that point. So, this kind of goes back to why I was pushing back on Dietrich earlier about that, because it's exactly that question. And we're not necessarily dead set on saying 7 surface water samples are, really adequate. But if we're going to disagree, or it's not even a disagreement, if we just have a different perspective on that, then let's talk about what it takes to answer the question. So that's what I meant by I may not be able to fully answer your question, because right now I could tell you, well, there are different methodologies for looking at the adequacy of data sets depending upon the variability and seasonality or known cyclical influences and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, what you all care about is feeling good about whatever our conclusions are and reaching a consensus. So, I do believe we are starting from those two different positions. We are trying to get to the middle, but it does take some hard conversations about what it takes for each person, each party to feel comfortable with the information that you're working with. And, the early part of the meeting tonight, you heard exactly that. The WSDs went through a report and talked about some data. Tom and others said, well, maybe we think there may be some holes in your data, and you need to do some fact checking on that data set before you start reaching those conclusions. And that's fine, and those questions should be asked. But at some point, we have to agree upon the tools and the criteria we're going to use to reach that middle ground. So whether it's EPA or it's CDPHE, we all have to get together, and we do in fact need to be on the same page from a from a scientific and a technical perspective, so that we can have a informed dialogue with you all. So if we think we're in a pretty good place and we think the data are adequate for certain purposes, but you all don't, then we need to talk about why not. And so I'm not sure I completely answered your question about what would it take for EPA to make a decision that we need more information. It really depends on what the questions are and those criteria for the adequacy of the data. And that is that's a broader discussion that does involve everyone. But you have to start that discussion. You have to get to a certain point when you have multiple parties involved before you can start to boil that all down to one particular approach that everybody can agree upon. So I don't know if that helps. Hopefully it answered part of your question.
I guess it offers some hope in terms of getting to addressing your questions. Questions such as the ones Dietrich and Tom raised tonight, and that we've raised many, many times in the past regarding the location of the wells, the frequency of sampling, etc. So I hope that Dietrich will be able to summarize those questions very precisely so that they will yield maybe yes/no responses in terms of, can you put in additional wells here and there, or can you do sampling more than once every so many years in these sites? Those kinds of questions that will yield, I guess, action responses that everyone can understand.
Right.
Thank you.
That would be good.
Well, I'd like to do a little time check here. It is just about 7:45. We have a couple things we'd like to try to cover, or if people prefer, we can just stay on this topic and you can rely on the written updates that we sent out. I know that Steve Richtel is ready to present some information about the molybdenum, and Linda and Colleen have other information. Janine and I have information on the CIP. Clearly, we're not going to do all of that in 15 minutes. So are there additional questions on the North End investigation, and should we perhaps just continue on that, or shall we wrap it up? Do we have some strong opinions? Okay, hearing none. Maybe we'll just move on to the site updates. And Linda, maybe you and then Colleen can cover those topics as quickly as possible, and then we can get to Steve.
Okay. I just have some quick things. So Lisa and I have been working on getting the facilitator hired. So the estimate right now is 4 to 5 weeks, which would put us probably beginning of July, but not ready for June. PWT and Tetra Tech are EPA's technical contractor. Their contract has been extended to the end of December, so we're really glad to be able to keep using them. Their contract was set to expire in July, so this is really good news for me. Tetra Tech has been working on the conceptual site model. We expect a draft to be ready by the end of this month. It will go to the WSDs in CDPHE for initial review. The state provided comments on, I think, the 3D visualization report, and the WSDs have too. Those are being incorporated into the report. So that report should be coming out soon. The WSDs provided EPA, after several discussions with EPA and the state, a notification to extracts additionally out of a well just down gradient of the North Boundary Barrier Wall. It's called North Boundary Barrier Wall IW3. This increased extraction from this well will help offset the extraction that we lost from the well that has the molybdenum in it. So I will be putting that notification report up on EPA's webpage, and I'll have Lisa send out a email letting you know that it's there and available if you wanted to look at that. It's also something we can talk about at a future CAG meeting if there's an interest in that. That's all I had. Who is Barracks? Did I mumble?
No, that was good.
We have somebody who's having trouble staying on the call or on the meeting, and they want to say something, but I don't know who it is. I don't know who BEREX is. That's Bonnie?
Bonnie? Yeah, I believe so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's probably her.
So Bonnie, if you can hear me, hello, wait. Bonnie, if you can hear me, *6 will unmute your phone. What's the last 3 digits of your number? Wait. It might be 905. Hold on. Yep. Hold on.
Can you hear me now, Janine?
Sure can. Go
okay.
ahead.
The person on here that's BEREX is me.
Okay, good.
That's my Gmail on my phone number.
Okay.
And I already typed in a question, but I guess I'll go ahead and ask it now that you can hear me. When we were talking about exposure for people, the CAG has been watching the ponds and Murphy Creek itself to see if people do go down into the ponds or go down into Murphy Creek, or if they cross the creek to go from Murphy Creek over into the convenience store. And Maggie was able to get a picture of some people paddleboarding on one of the ponds. And we were all wondering if they would remember to not drink the water if they fell in. So we're going to send a picture out to everybody that there is exposure routes and that people do mess around. And we've seen the kids down there playing now in between the convenience store and Murphy Creek. When the water isn't too high, then they like to go down in there to go over to the convenience store and they cross the pond. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I've been trying to get it forwarded. I wanted to get it forwarded out to everybody before this meeting, but my phone won't let me, so I'm going to ask Maggie to help me. But it is another exposure route, and maybe the EPA doesn't feel that there's any, maybe Dr. Berry and EPA have come to the conclusion from what they said tonight that it just really isn't that big an exposure risk. However, I would like to know, does EPA and Dr. Berry, is that okay that the 1,4-dioxane is there, or is it just the number that matters?
David, do you want to take that one? He's probably on mute.
Thanks, Bonnie. No, we don't discount that there might be incidental contact and exposure to either to the surface waters out there. There's been samples taken on like the 4 ponds out there, and every one of those samples came in at non-detect, and the looks like probably 9 surface water samples. The highest concentration reported is about 3.1 micrograms per liter, and the route of exposure that you're describing primarily is dermal contact, and 1,4-dioxane does not pass across the epidermis very readily, but those things can be estimated, and we certainly will do that.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm not sure if I'm being heard. Okay?
I can hear you.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so I guess the bottom line here is that only thing that matters is the number. It doesn't matter that it's there and that there's another 138 million gallons of chemical waste behind it, and we don't know when that may show up. It's just that right now it's okay because it's such a low number. Is that correct?
So David, did you hear the question?
I think he's muted again.
Yeah.
There he goes.
Yeah, it's essentially a question of concentration, and those are relatively low concentrations.
And we will, we'll continue to monitor.
Okay, I really know that you will, Linda. I really do, but I'm a little concerned because one of the reasons we wanted to have time to talk tonight, and I told Lisa, I'm sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to be rude to you, but I knew we wouldn't get to these other questions. But as most of you know, we have applied for an extension on our TAG grant, and thank you, EPA has decided they're going to extend us for a year, and we're very appreciative to that. But in the meantime, I asked why, what were the reasons that they held up our last payment for so long, and I expressed an interest in having answers as to what we had done wrong or illegal so that we would not do them again. And one of the things that came back to us in our answer from EPA is that our group's technical advisor developed a report dated May 18 discouraging further development in Murphy Creek. The group's chair, who is me, then shared the report to Aurora City Council, a council meeting 2 days later on May 20, prior to its vote on a potential Murphy Creek development. While development of the report may have been within the purview of the TAG, doing so for the purpose of distributing it to Aurora City Council to influence development decision runs contrary to federal regulations. So at some point, we need to talk about these things, Linda, because as a group, we don't want to do anything that's illegal. We don't want to do anything to jeopardize losing our technical advisor. But to me, the mandate of a grant for a technical advisor group is to educate the community, and the Aurora City Council and developers and the people that live in Murphy Creek and all of that, that is the public. And so at some point, we're going to have to figure this out so that we don't walk on eggshells trying not to break the rules. And so that's why I'm a little upset. I knew we wouldn't get to talk about the CIP or anything else tonight, but we really have to figure these things out so that we know where we're within our bounds and when we're not. And I once again want to thank EPA for saying you will extend our grant, which says to me we couldn't have been doing too much illegal, or you couldn't have given us an extension. So thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. And as we move forward, we'd like some clarification on what we've done that was wrong, because we plan on talking to the Aurora City Council in the future. We plan on talking to Arapahoe County in the future. And so I don't know, I'm going to have some boundaries here for what we can and can't do. So I would like to say that at some point we need to have a meeting about this, and I think the entire CAG needs to know what we're discussing, because they're some of the people we talk to. So again, thank you very much, EPA, for considering extending our grant. We appreciate it. We love Dietrich and want him to stay on board with us, and we appreciate his work, and we appreciate the fact that you did go ahead and approve us extension. So thank you very much. And could we please have a discussion at some future meeting on this and the CIP and the molybdenum, because we're out of time tonight, folks.
Yes, so Bonnie, I can invite Cease to either come to a meeting or have a phone, well, but it's all phone conference at this point, and go over what TAG grant funds can be used for. So it's not that you cannot educate the public. It's there's specific things within federal law that the grant monies can be used for and so cannot be used for. And one is the one you mentioned where the technical advisor writes something for what's in the law is considered lobbying or challenging EPA final decisions. So we can certainly go over that with you all so you understand it, and that we can make sure that things are documented properly so that you can get full reimbursement on your request. Absolutely, we can have Cease come and talk about that.
Yeah, and we can combine that with the CIP discussion. I think that would work probably.
Oh, that'd be perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and like I said, I would really appreciate it if the entire CAG could be informed of whatever our discussion is, because as far as I can see in reading the Federal Register rules and everything, we cannot lobby or use our funds to pay our technical advisor to help lobby to get somebody elected. That's illegal. And we have never done that, and we signed our papers that state that we will not use our funds to lobby to get a congressman or someone elected. We've never done that. We haven't even come close to it. But being concerned about building going on in a neighborhood where families are going to move in, that to me is not lobbying. And if we have to go to the city of Aurora and we have to say, here's our objection, we want to have good guidance for them, and that means that we get our technical advisor's advice on certain things that need to be looked for in this area. And that to me is not lobbying to get somebody elected. So we really need to delve into this, and I again appreciate your help, and I look forward to talking to you in the future, but I want to be sure that the rest of the general CAG are understanding that this is going on.
Great. And so the definition of lobbying is what is defined within the law. So that's EPA attorneys determine what the definition of lobbying. So it was determined to include local referendums or local issues in front of municipalities and city governments. So anyway, we can move on because we're got 1 minute left, and so we can plan for the next meeting or address any other questions or concerns. So I'll turn it back to Lisa.
Yes, so as far as I guess we'll just jump right to the June CAG meeting. I know that we're expecting the conceptual site model to be ready, I believe, and that again will be probably a voluminous issue to talk about. So anything else, Linda, that will go on to the June CAG meeting, or Bonnie, do you have other items for that meeting?
I'm just wondering if the June meeting, if one of the meetings between Sarah and Dietrich, if we won't need and the others, if we won't need an update on that. And then the June meeting, if we could please, could we please finish up the CIP, the molybdenum question, the letter I sent out on behalf of the CAG. We'd like to talk about that. We're hopeful that we can be a part of that. And then we want to update. And I know you sent out some written things, and I appreciate that. Oh, and by the way, Dustin, thank you so much for sending out the list of what's in the state's files. That is so helpful, and we do appreciate it very much. I'm sure that you had other things you needed to do too. So thank you for taking the time to do that. But that's what I would say was important for the June meeting.
Sure, we address here before everybody goes. Can EPA send out a summary statement about lobbying definition to all the group so that we can read it in advance of next meeting?
So there's a EPA fact sheet, and then there's also the actual verbiage in the law that I can send out. Yes.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Janine, very much. I appreciate that. And I also want you to know we have been contacting a professor at the law, a professor of law, and he sent us a description of what CAGs can and cannot do by law with their funds. And so I'd be happy to send that all along when I get EPA's definition. So, because we really are really nervous about all of this going on like it has been. So we're trying to make sure we don't do the wrong thing. So thank you very much, Janine, for that suggestion. And we will send out his briefing on what CAGs can do with their money. And we'll be looking forward to yours, Linda.
Know that Sonia asked that question. I just was the mouth for her.
Oh, cool. Well, you're a good Joe there.
I'm a moderator.
Okay, so I think we'll follow this up with a lot of meeting proposals and topic where we can try to get these other topics covered, some summaries of discussions and questions that will get answered. There'll be a lot of information coming out, I think, over the next month or so. So everybody stand by for those, and we'll definitely be in touch. Again, you can send Janine and I any emails, any questions you have, any follow-up, and we can work with you on getting those questions answered. Does anyone have anything else before we close? All right, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Apologies to those who did not get a chance to give their presentations as well. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Good
Have a good
night.
night.
Everybody take care.